listening to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network, the nonprofit organization that strives to address the staggering disparity in resource availability for individuals suffering from mental health disorders, processing disorders, addictions, trauma healing, and sexual identity challenges. Together, we strive to end the stigma associated with these challenges so that true healing can begin. Welcome back to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network. I'm your host, Ange, and welcome you to episode number 31. Today, we welcome Holly to hear her personal story of struggling with severe anxiety, fears, depression, and bipolar type 1, and the impact these challenges have had on her life. She vulnerably shares many stories, as well as her hope for today and the future. So, what are we waiting for? Fill up your coffee, sit back, relax, and let's get started. Okay, let's do this. First off, I have to thank today's guest because I was supposed to interview her several weeks ago, and we're going to talk about her story. And I know if you're going to be on a podcast talking about your story, there's a lot of anxiety leading up to it. And here I was the person who woke up sick that morning and said, I can't do it. And Ollie was amazing and said, yes, let's do it another time. Because I want to start off talking about this, and then I'll introduce our guest, because I personally struggled that day trying to decide what I was going to do. And I had to remember some of my own podcasts that we've had here where we talk about boundaries and things like that. And I decided this, that I was under the weather. I was not feeling well. I knew I couldn't give the best of myself. And I realized that while Holly's time today was really important, her story and having her story shared in the way that she wanted it shared was more important. And so by saying I am not at the optimum I can be to give the amount of value that you deserve, I had to think about that myself. And so listeners, I want you to hear that because I think we all struggle with those types of dilemmas. And I struggled with it that day. And I finally had to say, she deserves the best. I'm not at my best. Let's schedule it for another time. So thank you. And with that, I will introduce our guest, Holly. She knows several of the board members based on some of her treatment time. I'm going to let her now, as I classically say, I'm going to stop talking. And Holly, if you will introduce yourself and tell us why you're here today.
Hey, I'm Holly Hadaway. I'm here today just to talk a little bit about my personal story, which there's a lot to my personal story, so I'm not sure if we'll cover everything today, but I think what is important to me to point out from the beginning is that it's really been a lifelong journey for me with my mental health. I remember having issues really young as a child, very severe anxiety, very severe depression. I didn't know probably the words to put to it at that time. It was just really hard to verbalize it, I think, as a child. Even I'm talking about, 5 years old, first grade, being really depressed. And I think part of it is not feeling like I got the help I needed, but also I don't know that that's all on my parents, because I think part of that is hearing your child say they're sad all the time, but you're like, is this what I think it is? Probably them not knowing what to do, and a mixture of me as a child not knowing how to express my needs. So I remember getting responses from my parents like, oh, it's normal to be sad, So I began as a young child to think that this was normal, that I was just being sad most of my life, being anxious and fear was normal. And I began, finally, my parents sought help for me when I was about 10 years old. It wasn't for my depression, though. It was for my anxiety. And it's because at that point it had become a major inconvenience to the whole family. At the age of 10 years old, I could not be left alone. I was in fear for my life. Like, I know that's the only way I can describe it. This level of anxiety. I didn't know what I was afraid of. I just felt that there was something after me. And I don't know that I thought of it as a thing, but I think an important thing, like I said, of my story is this has always been there, these mental health issues, you know? And as I got older, I think things got worse and worse because of trauma on top of that. So going back to where I said, you know, just growing up in fear and my parents also not really knowing what to do. The first time I saw professional help, like I said, was 10, and it was a psychologist. I hated going to him. And I know when I was really young, a part of those fears I had, I didn't know what I was afraid of. As I got older and growing up in the South and in kind of the Bible Belt, I started interpreting my fears as demons. And I remember my psychologist did help me in some ways and wasn't the most helpful in others. You know, I remember him telling me things like, well, I'm pretty sure demons aren't real. And I'm like, well, if it was that easy, you know, then I wouldn't need to be here. But he did help me in kind of some ways were a little unconventional, but I definitely could see where he was going looking back. It was a lot of confronting my fears. So he would make me, I was very afraid of the dark too. He would make me sit in the dark by myself while he left the room and things like that for a certain amount of minutes. And some of that did help. So through seeing my psychologist, I reached a point to where I could like be alone when I was in middle school. And a lot of people misinterpret it as it being some kind of like attachment anxiety. It wasn't that. So it wasn't like attachment for my mom. Like I was scared for my mom to leave. It was just, I needed somebody there. Like I couldn't be alone. And then there are other things that played into this that I didn't know how to explain at the time, like sleep paralysis that made my fears worse. Hypnagogic hallucinations I had while I was in sleep paralysis.
I'm going to pause you right there. So one of the things, since our audience is so diverse, is that some terms they may not know what they are. So can you talk about that form of hallucinations and just describe what it is for listeners who don't know what that is?
Sleep paralysis, if you don't know what that is, first off, is when basically you wake up and you can move your eye, like you can look around, but you can't move and you can't speak. And it's basically what it is your body's basically waking up while but you're still in a certain stage of sleep you're not supposed to wake up at. So your body's still in that like paralysis state of sleep. And then it's almost like a dream state as well. So it's like your eyes in your mind can project dream images, like hallucinations, into the real environment you're saying, which can be very scary. So I'm sure that added into that extreme anxiety I had a lot as a child, because I remember having sleep paralysis like multiple times a week as a child. I had no idea what it was. I thought it was like some being freezing me. Like I would see red hands like reach up the side of the bed while I'm in this paralyzed state. I would have those hallucinations. And as a child, this was real to me. And it was very scary and hard to explain to my parents. And my parents didn't know what to do. And even the psychologist said this fear from what he saw wasn't necessarily anything my parents had done wrong. I was just kind of wired that way. I think getting help when I was at that, like 10, 11, 12, I think that did help some, but I really wished I could have gotten something much younger, especially for the depression part, not just, the fear, the anxiety. I remember being told a lot that it was normal to be sad. So I thought it was just normal to be this way. And I think a defining moment I had when I realized it wasn't normal, I was probably like 8 years old. And my family used to go to Disney World for Thanksgiving. Very privileged, very blessed in that. And as I got older, I actually found out that part of the reason my dad made sure we could go to Disney World every year for Thanksgiving was due to my mom's mental health. And she was always her happiest when we got to go on that vacation, because my mom has a lot of struggles with depression too. So I think, as I said, the defining moment was when I was about 8 years old. I was at Disney World with my family and just looking around at all these happy people in my family as a child at Disney World. And, they say it's the happiest place on earth. And feeling this deep heaviness, this deep sadness that I could not escape. And saying to myself as an 8-year-old, not having the words to say, oh, this is depression, but this is not normal. And I know I asked, my parents for help with that. And I don't necessarily feel like I got the help I needed with the depression, which, like I said, I'm not sitting here trying to blame them, because what do you do, if you don't know? And also, for some context, my parents are a lot older for my age. I'm 32 years old and my dad's almost 80 and my mom is about 75. So my parents are older, and some generational things do play into some of the thought patterns they may have been having as well, if that makes sense.
That absolutely does. And when you were talking about, I can imagine at 8 and hearing this every day, this is normal, because the reality is some form of living in emotions of being sad is normal. It's just being sad all the time is not normal. Right. And so I can imagine that. And also I was just thinking about when we talk about, episode 13, we talked about the link between childhood trauma and addiction. And one thing, whenever I talk to individuals who've overcome severe childhood trauma or who were in situations, is that if you've always been or felt a certain way or been in an environment that is a certain way, then it's very easy to believe this is normal and this is what everyone goes through. And it's not until you see something as profound as you being in Disney and seeing everyone else being happy and thinking, oh, wait, everyone else is not living this world that I'm living. Therefore, there is something that is off here, which I think is a common thread in a diverse group of challenges that individuals have. And that epiphany moment, whenever it hits, I believe is a blessing, because until that moment arrives, I don't know, if that were me, I might have felt like there's no hope. This is the way it's always going to be because this is how it is for everyone.
Right. I felt like listen, because I'm like, I can't deal with this. I can't deal with normal emotions. That's kind of what that made me feel. Like everybody feels this way. I just can't deal with it. It's kind of what it made me feel. Yeah, I do think it's kind of was a pivotal moment when I kind of realized that it wasn't normal to be sad, very sad most of the time, especially in, certain settings, if that makes sense.
So you're 8, and this is before you went to treatment, though, for anxiety, because you said you went to treatment for anxiety around the age of 10 to 12.
Yeah, that's when I started seeing a psychologist for the anxiety. And it's because my mom was sleeping with me still, and I could never be alone. Like, they couldn't even leave the house. Like, I could be in my room alone with the door open if somebody's in the house, if that makes sense. I could never be left at the house alone. Like, it was such an inconvenience for everybody, especially once I get to the age where I could be alone, but, I can just... There's a lot of pressure, I guess, on my parents having to feel like they had to be there all the time for me. So, and I think it was a strain on my parents' relationship, I'm sure, too, when my mom's sleeping with me all the time. But even once I started going to that psychologist, I still was not able to sleep by myself. Honestly, I didn't start sleeping by myself till I went to college. I made the decision to go away to college to force myself into that situation because I didn't feel like it would ever happen unless I had forced myself to do that. Going through that time with that psychologist, I did get to where I could be alone. And I know a lot of this might sound silly, but we're talking about if I was left alone.
None of this sounds silly.
I would have a panic attack. We're not talking about normal childhood fear. I'm talking about I would be sitting in my room and all of a sudden I feel panic and I have to run go find my mom or someone, or I am going to literally have a panic attack. So it was like on a very severe level, more than just regular childhood fears. And so, as I got older, I had to push myself. I made the decision to go away to college because I know like this wasn't normal. And obviously, if anybody found that out, like I used to get made fun of in high school, like, oh, your mom sleeps with you. And I was just like, all my friends knew that. And all my friends knew how scared I was. And I think my sister helped me a lot. My friends helped me a lot. Another thing to kind of speak to the genetics of this, I guess, because I do feel like the depression part, the anxiety part is genetic. My sister, my mom, have issues. My sister's anxiety is a lot different than mine, but it's very severe. My sister is this vibrant, beautiful person with a very vibrant, silly personality, but not many people get to see that because she has very severe social anxiety. And I think growing up, we kind of played off each other and we kind of enabled each other too, where we wanted to be helping each other and not knowing we're enabling each other as children because she's 3 years older than me. I would always be with her so I didn't have to be alone, and I would speak to people for her so she didn't have to speak to people, because my dad would always try to challenge her social anxiety and tell her like if she wanted something, she couldn't get it unless she asked the person herself. For example, we went to a lot of crafts fairs with my dad growing up, which was fun because he sells fudge at crafts fairs as a hobby. So, for example, if we were at a crafts fair and she wanted something from a booth, Daddy would tell her, like, you can get it if you go ask for it and talk to the people. But I, being her little sister and loving her so much, like, oh, I'll do it for you. I want to help. Not realizing that was enabling her. So I just wanted to add that in to say, like, mental health really can be very much genetic and passed down because there's a lot of things about me and my sister that a lot of similar issues, and they might present in different ways, but very similar.
I think it's normal if you're a mom to have moments of feeling mom guilt of things. And when you were just saying that story, I had this wave of mom guilt that I'm just going to talk about right now.
Okay.
I have a special needs daughter. She's a very rare brain disorder. And it manifests a lot in ways that are very similar to someone who has severe Asperger's and autism, but a heart of someone that has Down syndrome. So I've actually never heard her say anything negative about anyone in her entire life. She's a much better human being than I will ever be. And yet she also has that a part, I think, is as well. She's had low muscle tone based on the way that her brain and her body and her muscles develop. And so that impacts her speech and adding in the volume of her speech when she's talking in certain situations. But she's had moments where she's been terrified to go and ask for something and not thinking about it in that perspective. I absolutely have been the mom that has said, no, you need to go and do and push. And she didn't have a sibling. So she has many instances learned how to go and ask for things. But I want to be super clear. I was nowhere near as compassionate. It just never occurred to me that it would have some roots like this in it. And now as you're telling that story, I was picturing my head several times, forcing her to go and do something like that. And a part of me is like cringing. And then a part of me wants the listeners to hear this, because as parents, and I'm thinking about your parents, as parents, the parents that love their children, which is the majority of parents, we really just want the best for our kids. And it's hard because you're like, I don't have a degree in child development to know that. And I just, did the best I could with the knowledge that I had. And so I do want to affirm all the parents out there that may hear some of these stories and suddenly say, oh, wow, that was my child. I do not want individuals to take away the message of shame and guilt.
No.
I want the message of education and understanding and how we can grow together. So I wanted to be vulnerable there for a moment because I was feeling a moment of,
And I wasn't trying to say my dad did something bad. I feel like he was just trying to push her to go out of her comfort zone. And it honestly might would have been good for her to do it. But that's why I said I feel like I was enabling her a little bit by helping her too much.
Well, if my daughter, hopefully she'll go to therapy one day, because I believe all human beings should go to therapy. I'm a strong believer of that. And so I used to tease when she was younger and say that my goal in life was to have a child that didn't realize they needed to go to therapy until they were on their own insurance plan. So if my daughter does go to therapy one day and her therapist listens to this episode and they're having this conversation about what my daughter's mom did, I'm sorry. I tried. Love her. I'm going to ask how this fear, anxiety, and depression impacted your social life growing up. So I'm so glad you went into there and then into that level of conversation. And so then you made the decision to go off to college, which meant, had your sister already gone off to college at this point?
My sister stayed in Milledgeville and went to college.
Okay.
In my hometown.
Okay.
She's never left our hometown, and I think some of that, too, is at times she might need the support of my parents for certain things, but I don't know. She might leave one day. We'll see.
Okay, but you said, which I think is so courageous, that you said the only way at this stage, I'm going to have to leave now and go to college. So that was so brave. So can you maybe walk through the beginning time at college where you suddenly are now sleeping alone? You don't have kind of the built-in, because one of the things I think of, for example, when I think about my daughter, when she was in specifically middle school, in late elementary and early middle school, she went to a private Christian school. And it was great because the kids, she just got in a great class, and the kids knew her. And so when she did something, they knew her heart. They knew she was an amazing human being, and she was different from the other kids, and they loved her for that. And that was an amazing time of her life. Okay. Then we moved down to the city, or up to the city of Atlanta, and she was in high school. And suddenly when you're in high school, the kids didn't know her and didn't get her. She didn't have that safety net of the people that would understand, for example, that you're sleeping with your mother because of this reason. She didn't have that kind of, and it caused a lot of challenges for her in high school in that transition. So can you share with us how your transition, the beginning of your college adventure was like?
It was scary. I did have a boyfriend there that was a year younger than me that I dated in high school, but he wasn't always the most supportive. Looking back, I had probably some sleepless nights, I'm sure. I slept with all the lights on, and I'm not gonna lie, I've just gotten over being scared of the dark when I was like 27. When I was in college, even though I did get to the point where I could sleep by myself, I could be by myself, I slept with every light on.
I'll be super clear. I was always afraid of the dark, and I had severe childhood trauma. There were lots of reasons I was afraid of the dark and noises in the dark. I'm still afraid of the dark. I do like to sleep in the dark, right? But I'm not going to, if I'm in a room and the lights go out, I am not happy about it at all. I'm very anxious, very nervous. And I have a service dog. Thankfully, I feel a lot more confident with the service dog there, because if something's going to happen, it's not going to happen to me. But I get that. I don't know how you're feeling, because I don't like when people say that. However, I can relate to being an adult and being afraid of something that the people around me think is ridiculous for me to be afraid of.
And people do think it's silly. And I think something important to add also, my junior year in high school, before I went to college, we had a house fire that I was in. Me and my parents were in. My sister had already gone to college, so she wasn't living in the house with us. But like, we woke up in the middle of the night and were in the fire and escaped. And that added on to a lot of my fear, that PTSD, just feeling really scared. So with that, I had a little, it's like I'd been making progress, and then the fire happened and I had a backslide. And then that's when, after that, I pushed myself to go to college, because I'm very blessed, though, that I did have some high school friends that went to college with me that I ended up I wasn't like the best friends with them in high school, but I was friends with them. And then we became closer friends there in college, which was really a blessing because they did know some of these things about me, like the fire. And I feel like it was a blessing because my friends did normalize it. They made me feel normal. After the fire, too, it wouldn't be a strange thing for if I was woken up out of sleep suddenly, I just wake up screaming. Like that hasn't happened to me in a very long time, but that in those years, that was very common for me. So I might fall asleep on the couch at my friend's house, and then somebody, we're in college, they would be having a party or something, and I fall asleep on the couch, and then they get loud, and I just wake up like screaming, and they never made me feel bad for that, or like I was weird, or because they knew what I'd been through.
You had some amazing, unique friends, because I often hear the other side of the story of individuals. So I'm so grateful for that for you. Okay, so you go to college. What were you passionate about, and what did you study in college?
I was passionate about special education, which I just love people that are different for whatever reason. And I actually had a very strong passion for working with students with more severe disabilities. And I really loved teaching when I did do it. I had some really bad experiences in college with some other traumas, kind of with administration. But going through that experience, I was so passionate about these kids. And my mom was a special education teacher. My grandma was too. And I think another thing that kind of led me in that path was friends I had that were different. Haley was one of my best friends growing up in school. And her brother Dylan is a year younger than us, and he has cerebral palsy, and he's pretty severely intellectually disabled as well. And just having a very close relationship with him and their family, knowing what a lot of people don't realize is that people like that are beautiful and vibrant, and they have wonderful personalities, even if they cannot always communicate in the same way. I think I've always had a passion for trying to help people that are different, because I always felt different, and I always felt like there wasn't anyone that could help me. And I, even though that my needs weren't necessarily in the intellectual realm, as far as that's what I would work with, mainly in special education with kids with intellectual disabilities. But I did know what it felt like to be different and feel like there wasn't help for me. And some of my most beautiful memories are with students I had, even though I chose to then get a master's in therapy and move that direction. It's really sad because what pushed me away from working with special education was some of my traumas I kind of underwent through this process while I was in student teaching. The first time I was student teaching, I'd actually been chosen, the only one out of the special education cohort, to student teach in London for the second half of the semester. Like, I had to apply for it, I had to interview for it, and I was chosen. Before you get to student teaching at Georgia Southern, it's a very rigorous process. You are in so many practicums. You teach so much before you're even in student teaching. And basically, at that point, I did have a lot of depression. But teaching, I was able to excel in my education at that point. I was able to excel at that because I loved it. It's what I cared about. And I was able to excel through my depression until came into student teaching. And even though I had been chosen to go to London and all this stuff, I got in this teacher's room and I literally couldn't do anything right. But it was like I couldn't do anything right. I wasn't given direction on told how to do it differently. And so I was seeking advice from people at the school. I remember going to my supervisor the first week of that placement and telling her, if I stay in this classroom, I won't graduate. I don't know what it is about this teacher. She just has something against me and I don't know what it is. Because, with the other teachers I'd worked with, I had done glowing Yeah, they gave me glowing reviews, loved working with me. All my evaluations up until that point had been great. Like, I was doing great in this program. All of a sudden, basically, this teacher, going back to when I told my supervisor that I wouldn't graduate if I stayed, it was just nobody listened. And basically, I ended up getting kicked out of student teaching. And then my supervisors are then agreeing with this teacher. It was like I felt gaslit in the whole thing. I appealed it to the dean.
So can you describe for the listeners what gaslighting is? I realized in a previous episode, I think we talked about it. And then I thought I didn't pause for a minute to kind of describe what it is. And I think it's very important for people to understand it because I see it happen a lot. And I believe there's value in adding a word to an experience so that individuals can understand it.
In this situation, it was like they were making me feel crazy. So the main way that I felt gaslit in this situation was basically, as I said, I told my supervisor if I stay in this classroom, I won't graduate. And she literally is like, no, you've always done so well. Yada, yada. And the next thing we know, I'm having my supervisor shows up at the school one day and they're like, we need to have a meeting. And all of a sudden, my supervisor's agreeing with this teacher. Like, I can do nothing right. And I'm literally like, a few weeks ago, you said I was great and all this, and now you're agreeing with this lady? And it was also like the teacher also caught me in a moment of weakness. After that, when I was crying, and pretended to be kind to me and then used the things I told her in that moment against me when she got me kicked out of student teaching. And it was like I had, like, all the other teachers I'd worked with wrote letters to the school about this. And they were like, we can't believe this. Talking about my performance and how well I worked with the kids. And I appealed it all the way to the dean, but they basically said since that teacher asked the principal for me to leave, there was nothing they could do. And I didn't get to go to London. I had bought my ticket. I literally felt crazy. I really had to look at myself objectively. Are these things they're saying true? They said things like I was negatively impacting the kids in the room. And I was like, I think looking back, without going into this too much more, the teacher was having some really hard issues herself that maybe she took out on me in a way she didn't mean to.
I believe happens a lot. I see that a lot. I see that a lot in leaders who, in the way that they manage their team members and people. And it's sad to sit back and watch it. And it's also why I will reiterate that I believe all human beings can benefit from therapy and can benefit from being getting to know humans as humans. Because when we get to know humans as humans, then when I see someone and they're struggling, my first reaction is not, this person is bad, inadequate, all of these things, right? My first reaction is, this is a human being. And maybe the way that they reacted in this meeting, the reason it seems so off from everyone else in the room is quite possibly because they have something else going on in their life. And I feel very blessed in the company I run now that so many of the team members that work on my teams have been so vulnerable with me so that it helps me as their collaborative leader to, when I see these things, I can acknowledge it, have compassion, and help set them up for success. So I think that understanding and having a safe environment, working in a safe environment. And so I would encourage any leaders, managers, company owners, anyone that is working, figure out a way to create a safe environment in your area, because that's how everyone's going to be successful. So That's such a key point.
It was a really hard blow for me because I also felt like nobody was trying to help me. I was asking people, the teachers I worked with, but as far as the school failed me. It was very traumatizing for me because they were saying things about me that were not true. And just the school saying, well, yeah, you've had this wonderful performance, but there's nothing we can do. But I was able to student teach the next semester, and I was given a different supervisor, and I excelled. And it was actually funny because in my evaluations, all the areas they said I was lacking, the reasons they kicked me out were areas in which I was praised. So that confirmed for me even more that, that was not my fault. But I think it's very important to acknowledge that that was a big seed that was planted in me. That it was a very big trauma for me getting kicked out of student teaching, of doubt in my abilities and myself. And that seed grew, and there was a lot going on around this time period too. So 4 months before our students taught, I got bit in the face by a dog and my lip was hanging off, had to have it reattached, part of my lip was missing. That was a huge trauma. Then a few months later, when I go into student teaching and have this trauma, and then I was able to student teach the next semester, which was the fall semester. And then while I'm student teaching in November, I get sexually assaulted. And I am just, at that point, I was in therapy. My boyfriend's mother at the time, I wanted to call the police. After I was sexually assaulted, she told me nobody would believe me because we were drinking. So yeah, there's some victim blaming there, making me feel bad. And so I didn't talk to anybody about that sexual assault really for a long time. I just bottled it up and kept student teaching. And I graduated the next month, and nobody knew. It was the last month, like towards the end of my student teaching when it happened. I just kept pushing through. And then I graduated and I got my first teaching job. And they basically told me it was MOID class, which is mild to moderate intellectual disabilities, and was self-contained class, which meant the kids would be in the room with me all day, which was what I wanted. I get in the classroom and start looking at the children's files. And I was teaching a classroom for children with emotional behavior disorders, and they did not tell me. I was not equipped for my first year teaching. I didn't feel prepared for that. And I felt like I was set up for failure, and this seed began to grow. Because I asked for help. And it was this thing where all these people would tell me they would help me and nothing would come of it. And through this, I've started seeing a psychiatrist at this time and have been diagnosed with bipolar 1. That was actually while I was student teaching too. So in the midst of all that. And then in this first teaching job, they're still trying to work out my medication, find some medication that can help me. And I'm stuck in this impossible situation with kids I don't feel equipped, and they pulled my assistant the first day. So I'm literally in this classroom that I can't manage because I don't feel equipped for, and no one will get me out when I ask for it. And then both my grandparents died within 3 weeks of each other that year. And it was just like this seed began to grow of me feeling like a failure because I was in these impossible situations, and that trauma began to grow. And I think that's a lot of what made me leave teaching, is just thinking, if I do something different, it'll be better. But it wasn't. The problems were still there. At this point, I had been seeing a psychiatrist in that first job teaching. This would have been probably 2014. That's when my grandparents died, when I was my first teaching job. And I ended up having to get a medical resignation from that job. I broke my contract. And it's funny because then later down the line, after I felt better and tried to get a job in Baldwin County again, the board found me ineligible for rehire because even though it was a medical resignation, they knew why. Because I had told some people within the system and I really regretted it. And they used my mental health against me. And it was very hard for me to find another teaching job after that.
So then what made you go from teaching to going, I guess, back to school to get your master's? Or were you doing both at the same time?
After that job, the next year, I was able to get a job teaching students with severe and profound disabilities at the high school level. I loved those kids. It was in Duluth near Atlanta. And I loved those kids so much. A lot of them were medically fragile in wheelchairs. None of my students could communicate verbally, except for one student. I had a very large class for that type of class. I had 9 kids. Usually you have 4 to 5. But I did have 3 assistants. That was a very horrible experience for me as far as the people I worked with. For the most part, the children were beautiful. My assistants basically kind of ganged up on me in that situation. I think a lot of that was me being younger than them, coming into a situation where they felt like they knew more than me, and me coming in and changing the way the classroom ran, and they didn't like that. And so they would bully me really bad. I would come to school and try to be nice to them and pleasant and be like, hey, and just very rude in the classroom. And I think when I, though, decided to make the switch to therapy, it was just because I didn't know what to do next. I still wanted to help people. That's all I knew. But I couldn't do this anymore for whatever reason. It wasn't because of the kids, it was just because of the experiences I had had while teaching that were so traumatizing. I do think that was a beautiful experience as far as the children. I still speak to some of those kids' families. I'm divorced now, but I got married in 2017. One of my students from that school came to my wedding. The kids, I probably would have left that job mid-year too had it been for the kids with the way I was being treated. I actually went into therapy on a manic episode because I remember I was applying for master's programs in special education, and I'd always known what school I was interested in. And then I was still just having such a bad experience. And all of a sudden one day I was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. And it was literally within a week I flipped from applying to these special education programs to the next week applying to therapy programs. And I wrote my entrance essay for Mercer University, which in Macon, which is where I went for the family therapy program at 3 a.m. I'm pretty sure I was in a manic episode. I'm a very good writer though, but it's 3 a.m. And yeah, at that time, I don't think I realized I was kind of in a manic state, but looking back, I definitely was. I'd also started going to therapy again, through all this, my own therapy. And I think part of another thing in me going into therapy is just wanting to help people. Like I said, I'd always felt like someone that couldn't be helped, I think. And so I wanted to be able to help other people. And going through that program, it was very hard. It took me 4 years, and when it was supposed to take 2, because I took a break to go to inpatient for the first time in 2018. I went to a place called Hopeway in North Carolina for about 30 days. It was a good place. I don't think it was the most helpful for me. I felt like I needed a little more. I felt like a lot of the things I was learning there were things I had already learned in my education as a therapist, and I needed help applying them more. But I do think it was really good that I went because I was so scared the first time I went. And then later, as you know, I did end up going to treatment again to the refuge. 2021? Is that when we were there?
Yes, 2021.
May 31st, 2021 is when I left.
Okay, yeah.
Or is it 2020?
2020, I think.
2021. That's right. I know the date, but I was mixing up the year.
Wait, let's see. 2021. No, 2021. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Time flies.
Yeah.
It's like confusing. This is how I remember. My kidnapping happened in August of 2020. And so then it was, I was there in 2021, which many of the other individuals that were there in 2021. So yeah.
Right. But I do think that first experience of going somewhere voluntarily inpatient, when I went to the refuge, it was easier. I knew, even though I didn't exactly know what to expect, I somewhat knew what to expect, even though it was going to be different. So yeah, I took a lot of break in my education, and something that still rings true to this day that my longest therapist always said to me was, I really think you could do anything as long as you have an end date. That's the thing we have to get past, is I could do things. She was like, I swear you could do anything as long as it had an end date. So I went to inpatient on one time through my master's program, went back to school, took another break. I was married at this point. My husband had to have a double hip replacement at the age of 29, which was this weird medical condition we found out he had, which was a big thing. Like, what? And so I had to take breaks for that too. It was a real big struggle with my mental health, and within that relationship too, was a lot of turmoil with my husband because we were both alcoholics, which my alcoholism mainly just kind of affected me because I wasn't the type. People didn't know I was drunk when I was drunk. It mainly affected me. People couldn't tell, they just like, oh, you're normal. It mainly affected me and my depression and my mental health. But my husband's alcoholism, wow, he was wild on another level. I've never seen anybody like him, which luckily he's sober now. We're not together, but good for him. He's sober. But I think a lot of that too was him not understanding my mental health and him putting a lot of pressure on me to be somewhere I wasn't yet, at a point I wasn't yet. So I took a lot of breaks. I graduated with my master's degree in therapy in May of 2020. And I worked for about a year as a therapist, then went to the refuge. At this point, I was going for mental health and trauma. And I also made the decision to become sober from alcohol while I was there. So that was a really good thing that I didn't expect. And after I went to the refuge, I then went to sober living in Delray, Florida, because I just wanted to make sure I stayed sober from alcohol. And something that really I took away as far as the substance abuse piece and, just recovery in general, that one of my therapists said there to me was that you cannot fit your recovery into your life. You have to build your life around your recovery. And that's why I went to Delray. I wanted to do something different. At that time, I had planned to stay there. But then my husband had gotten sober too, and we were separated. We were still married. Since we were both sober, I decided to come back to Georgia and give that relationship one last shot since we were both sober. It didn't work out, but I do think I felt more comfortable in the end walking away knowing I had given it my all. And I also don't regret coming back to Georgia because I met my now partner when he moved back here to Georgia and my lovely little step baby. So I think going to the refuge and getting that treatment that was specifically focused on trauma was a very big turning point in my recovery. I felt like a different person when I left the refuge. Now, that being said, once you leave treatment, it has its own challenges. I think something really important through my journey is to remember that progress is never linear. Just because I felt like I was doing great 3 months ago doesn't mean I'm not gonna, have some hard times, some really hard times. And, that's okay because I'm doing my best. And that's something that I really realized at the refuge. There was a big shift in my self-image where my own self-critic used to say things like, oh, you couldn't even finish this program in 2 years. You have a 3.9. You could have done better. You kept quitting. But now I'm like, no, I always went back. I didn't fail. I would have failed if I hadn't kept trying. Success is never easy. A good success story is never, oh, I went and did something and it was easy. A good success story is you fail and you fail and you fail and you keep trying. And that was my perspective shift leaving the refuge. I used to be so hard on myself. But then when that perspective shifted, I was like, no, I was severely depressed and I made it through a very rigorous master's program. Maybe I took some breaks, but I finished and I still had a 3.9. If I didn't have all these issues, just imagine what I could have done, so no, I did my best and I killed it. I think even then, as I said, remembering progress isn't linear and coming back to Georgia and then getting back into working and getting back into being a therapist. And that was something I really wanted to do, and I was good at it. My clients spoke really highly of me, and they usually told me they really liked me, and they all made good progress. I was a good therapist. But then there became a point where I knew that if I continued helping other people as a therapist, it would be at my own expense. And I also knew that if I didn't take care of myself, I wouldn't be able to give other people my best anymore. at some point, I wouldn't be a good therapist anymore because I wouldn't be my best self, and so I couldn't be my best self for others. It came to a point where with my last therapy job, I actually didn't even realize fully at first what the stress was doing to me until I started to become physically sick. I started throwing up every day. Every morning I would wake up nauseous. And it was becoming a big problem for work because some days I would wake up and I might throw up for a little bit and then be able to go to work. But some days I would just dry heave all morning and I couldn't go. And then after I quit my therapy job, because I started realizing maybe this is stress, and they were also putting extra stress on me to be there because I couldn't figure out why I was sick. Like, I kept going to all these doctors and they're like, nothing's wrong with you, basically. Like, physically, I guess you would say, even though we know mental and physical are so linked. But I just became so sick that I couldn't work, and I tried teaching pre-K again, a job at a daycare here, and I ended up getting sick there, basically, is the gist of it, and not being able to work there either. And luckily, my partner is very understanding because if you can't work, how do you then, or at least a traditional job, you have to figure something else out, right? You have to then figure out, how am I going to live? The thing was, like, especially with teaching, like, some days when I was teaching pre-K, some days I could be fine, but then it was just really unpredictable sometimes with my mental health, is I think the thing that's important to state is the unpredictability of it sometimes. So I have applied for disability for the second time. I got denied the first time. And I think something that is important to remember is I look good on paper. I have a bachelor's degree. I have a master's degree. Someone looks at that and say, oh, she could get a master's degree. She's all right. Like, she can do stuff. No, that's not the case. That was so hard for me to do. I had to take so many breaks, And if it was something I had to do forever, I couldn't have done it. Like I said, I may start working again at some point in some different kind of capacity. I've thought about doing some kind of life coaching because I do think I could still use my gifts to help people in other ways. And life coaching would be working with a little bit different types of problems, if that makes sense. Not so trauma heavy. I had a lot of other clients that I was helping that had trauma, which began to weigh on me as well, because I do feel so much for other people. It's going to take a year for them to review my application for disability. I'll probably get denied again, but all I can do is try. And I'm very blessed and very lucky to have an amazing partner who, I was with my ex-husband for 10 years and he always put pressure on me, always made me feel lazy, like I wasn't trying hard enough. But my partner now, he said, no, I've already seen what working does to you. And like, I don't want that for you. And I appreciate that so much. And, so now I'm kind of just in this space of kind of rewriting what success means for me. I know in the past, I really attributed my success to, my master's degree in therapy or the work I was doing. But now, I'm more so, I guess, kind of, me and my partner are married, so I guess a stay-at-home girlfriend. I don't know, but I try, since he is so understanding, I try to do anything to make his life easier. I will do anything around this house for us since he is so understanding, which is night and day with my last relationship. For my ex-husband, I didn't do anything for him, but it's because he made me feel like I wasn't trying hard enough. But my partner now, just that he recognizes how hard even just everyday life is for me. I appreciate that so much that I would do anything for him that I could. And He has a daughter that we have part-time. She's 2 years old and she's a love of my life. I think that's a big part of what success means for me now is being the most loving, kind person I can to my partner, to my step baby. And knowing that now I can do things differently than were done for me. I know that if my stepdaughter has any of the issues I had, then even if I don't know exactly how to respond, I am going to find out. I will get her the help she needs. I just know that I can make a shift in that and do better than what was done for me. And, like I said, I'm not trying to disparage my parents. I don't mean that.
I think that was powerful. What I was just trying to look up was I was trying to remember which peer-to-peer support certification I worked to get last year. And it was the NAMI version, which is National Alliance of Mental Illness. I've also participated in the DBSA support groups, which is Depression Bipolar Support Alliance. These different programs out because in participating in both of these programs, I've talked to and experienced similar stories from others who struggle with or suffer from, in some instances, right, severe depression and bipolar and the impact that it has on their life. And a lot of them, they are feelings of shame, guilt, and the amount that others look at them and say, I think of it, for example, of someone with an eating disorder and someone comes up. So, after my kidnapping, I was at the refuge in what I call eating disorder camp. And it was funny because people will say, well, just eat. What's the big problem? And I love that because I want to say, yeah, absolutely. It never occurred to me that that's exactly what I should do, right? Like in the most sarcastic way possible. And I find that, in fact, our series that's Between the Lines, we're recording this on Sunday, October the 22nd. And this week, Between the Lines is a blog series where an individual who doesn't want their voice and their vocal voice as their interview will write a blog post, and either myself or in the future, we have some actors and actresses who are going to read them, will read the blog post. And one of the ones that's coming up soon that I just read by one of the authors talks about the impossible task, the idea of the impossible task. And they walk through when they are in severe depression, an impossible task for them is opening up the mail and sorting the mail. And many individuals will think, well, that's easy. You just open the mail or throw it away. No, you don't just do anything when you're in those moments. The amount of energy that it takes an individual struggling with that is so profound and is so much. Yeah. And I see so many individuals who talk about struggles similar to yours, and my heart just explodes. And one of the points of this podcast is to educate the community to realize that individuals who struggle in these scenarios are quite often not at all lazy. Like they're trying everything they possibly can to be able to give back to the world in their own unique way. Yeah. And I think the more that we as human beings have compassion and love and support and understanding more than anything of these scenarios and realize what's difficult for me one day is not difficult for somebody else. Yeah. And that's just fine, but it doesn't mean I should minimize their difficulty and their challenge. And this is real. So I'm so grateful. And I said to you earlier, we have to make sure we cover this part because I know there are individuals out there who are struggling and have perhaps advanced degrees or have means in some areas, and they're unable to work because of these challenges. And a lot of society, a reaction is that person is just lazy or that person doesn't care or they just want somebody to support them. And
right. And no, I don't want this. I don't want to feel like I have to depend on someone else. If I didn't have him, what would I do? It's the sad reality of it.
Tell us a couple things. One, as we're nearing the end, two things. is there anything you really want to make sure we cover that we haven't covered? And I also want you to share what do next steps look like for Holly right now?
I'm just really trying to focus on being my best self. And as I said, I may do something in the future. I've thought about doing some kind of life coaching, something that I could work on my own, because life coaching is different than therapy, but I think for now, my success, I attribute to how I treat others. I think just working on myself. And another thing, I think we talked about episode 8 with the therapy burnout. I'm someone who's been in therapy for the most part since I was 10 of some sort. And you want to talk about somebody, I know I still have work to do. I know I still have healing. I am doing that in different ways right now. One big way for me is I love to dance. I love to dance for fun. I don't care what I look like. And I try to encourage other people to dance for fun, to be happy, to just celebrate yourself and feeling good in that moment.
So a requirement of this podcast is to share your favorite motivational quote. What's your favorite motivational quote that you want to share with us?
So the first one, I actually have two. I don't know if we have time, but my first one is always do what you're afraid to do. It's a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote. That one's actually important to me because I shared a little bit about my sister and how her social anxiety is very debilitating. Years back, she decided to really push herself and go to Thailand by herself for a few months. And I feel like I'm going to cry. I was so proud of her, knowing her doing that by herself. And when she came back, it was around the same time I was graduating with my bachelor's degree. And she made me a necklace and it said that quote on it. And so I just thought that was really inspiring because she put herself in a situation that she was so afraid of, and she did it, and that's how I try to live, usually things that are worth doing are scary. With my divorce, I knew I needed to do it. It would have been easier not to, but I knew I needed to do it for me, and it was scary and it was hard, but it was worth it, taking those steps for myself. The other quote I really love is a General Patton quote, which it was a World War II general, which has some kind of specific special meaning to me just because my grandpa fought in World War II and he was under General Patton. The quote is, "Courage is fear holding on a minute longer." That just goes to show you can't have courage without fear. Being courageous is doing something and doing it scared, but doing it anyway. That's what courage is. And I've always pushed myself to do my best for myself, and the people I love, whether people see that or not. Some people don't see that. I think that is just really important, to do things that are scary, even, do things that are important even when they're scary, I guess.
So I have in my office, I have on the board some recent of my favorite quotes from different episodes. And I'm definitely adding the General Patton quote to that because I just absolutely love that. So thank you so much, Holly, for being here today, for being vulnerable, for sharing your story.
Thank you.
It was amazing. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, it's such an honor. And I appreciate y'all. I think so much of y'all for the work that y'all have been doing with this network, for people to get, mental health care that they deserve. I just think it's great. So thank you. It's a privilege.
Thank you. You just listened to episode number 31 with our friend Holly. We hope you've been encouraged and learned something from today's story. As a reminder, the experiences and advice expressed in this episode are the hosts and guests' own personal stories and do not represent the opinions of any organization mentioned. RAN is passionate about opening the doors for all voices and experiences, not just those expressed in any particular podcast. If you want to share your experiences or expertise, we encourage you to be a featured guest by emailing us at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org or submit a blog post by emailing blog@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. We are proud that every individual working with RAN does so on a 100% volunteer basis.
You can support the mission by clicking the love, not like icon in our podcast and subscribing. We hope you will also connect with us at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org, where you can donate to the mission, read blog posts, and stay in the loop about upcoming events. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Recovery Advocate Network and on Twitter at Ran to Wellness. So, listeners, pause what you're doing, subscribe, follow us, give us a 5-star rating, provide some feedback, and finally, share these episodes with your friends. You never know whose heart you will touch, so please be a part of the reason someone has new hope today. If this episode was triggering to you, we encourage you to contact your support system, therapist, national and community support groups, the Global Crisis Text Line by texting 741-741, and/or, if in the United States, dialing 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you're in the U.S. and need additional resources, such as shelter, support group resources, transportation, food, and/or a safe, confidential path out of domestic abuse, call 211 or visit www.211info.org for assistance. Now, we know you're super busy. We're really grateful you said yes to spending some time with us today. So don't forget to leave those comments on the episode and email us, and we'll talk to you soon. Now, back to your coffee.